The rifle shot cracked through the desert twilight like a whipstone, fragments exploding from the creek bank, mere inches from Rose Callahan's face. She stumbled backward into the rushing water, her leather satchel slipping from trembling fingers as 3 mounted gunmen thundered down the rocky slope toward her. "There's our little thief." Flintface's voice carried clearly over the churning water. The scarred foreman's pale eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction as he raised his Winchester for another shot. "Miss Callahan, you've got something that don't rightfully belong to you." Rose's boots found precarious purchase on the slick stones, but her waterlogged wool skirt dragged at her legs like chains. The precious ledger pages, her only proof of Victor Pike's systematic theft and murder, disappeared beneath the foam as her satchel was swept downstream by the relentless current. As she fought for footing, a vivid memory crashed through her mind with devastating clarity. She was 12 again, standing on the New York docks, watching her father Patrick examine frayed cable rigging with growing alarm. "Rose, darling," he'd said in his gentle brogue, "when ye see danger clear as day, ye must speak loud enough for the deaf to hear." But no one had listened to Patrick Callahan's warnings about the rotting cables, just as no one wanted to hear about dock owner corruption. 3 weeks later, those same cables snapped, dropping a full cargo load and sending her father plunging into the black harbor water where he drowned while she screamed helplessly from the pier. "Not again," she thought fiercely, drawing strength from her father's memory. "I won't let them silence the truth again." At 25, she'd survived the potato famine in County Cork, the coffin ships to America, and 3 years scratching out survival in Arizona territory. She would not die here at Willow Creek, not when she'd finally found evidence that could bring down the most powerful man in the territory. A second gunshot rang out, but this time from behind the riders. Flintface's hat flew from his head, pinned to a cottonwood by a steel-tipped arrow. The foreman spun in his saddle, his confident sneer dissolving into confusion. "What in blazes?" His words died as one of his companions toppled from his mount, clutching an arrow protruding from his shoulder. From the creek's shadowed bank emerged a figure moving with liquid grace, tall, lean, bronze-skinned, carrying a Spencer carbine with deadly purpose. Chogan had lived 30 years on this harsh land, first as a Chiricahua Apache scout, then as a horsebreaker serving the territorial remount station. His black hair was bound with worn leather, and intricate beadwork circled his throat, blue and white patterns that caught the dying light. His obsidian eyes missed nothing as he raised the rifle and fired once. The third rider's horse reared wildly, dumping its burden into the rocky shallows. Flintface wheeled his mount toward the far bank, cursing as he drove spurs deep. "This ain't finished breed," he shouted over his shoulder. "Pike's got long arms and a longer memory. Your brother found that out at San Pedro." The words hit Chogan like a physical blow. His grip tightened on the rifle until his knuckles went white. But Flintface was already disappearing into the dusk, leaving only dust and echoing hoofbeats. Rose pulled herself onto the Bank Creek water, streaming from her heavy skirts. Her red hair had escaped its pin's copper strands clinging to her pale cheeks. She was shivering violently, whether from cold water or sheer terror she couldn't say. "Can you stand?" The Apache's English carried only the faintest accent learned from Army scouts and territorial officials. Rose nodded, accepting his calloused hand. His palm was warm, despite the evening chill scarred from years of working with rope and leather. "The satchel," she gasped, scanning the churning water desperately. Everything was in there, ledger pages, receipts, proof of what Pike's been doing. Currents running fast with snowmelt. Could be miles downstream by morning. Chogan studied her face in the gathering darkness. What was worth dying for? Rose wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how her wet clothes revealed the sharp angles of poor nutrition and constant worry. This Apache warrior had saved her life without question, but she knew nothing of his true intentions. "Evidence," she said carefully. "Documents showing Victor Pike has been falsifying water surveys, stealing rights that belong to homesteaders and your people. When folks complained, Pike sent men like those to silence them permanently. Chogan's expression hardened at Pike's name. The beadwork at his throat seemed to catch the last rays of sunlight. You work for him. I kept his books, past tense. Rose pushed wet hair from her face. Until I found payment records for hired killings, men paid to clear land around places like San Pedro. The effect was immediate. Chogan's entire body went rigid, and something dangerous flickered behind his dark eyes. San Pedro, he repeated softly. 8 years passed. You know it. Instead of answering directly, Chogan moved to check the wounded rider struggling to mount his horse. Blood seeped through the man's fingers where he pressed them to his shoulder. Tell Pike, Chogan called to the injured gunman, his voice carrying deadly clarity, that Chogan remembers San Pedro. Tell him Talon's brother knows who paid for the ambush. The rider spurred his horse into the darkness, swaying, but determined to escape with his life and message. Rose stood alone with her rescuer beside the creek, where her evidence had vanished. The air carried scents of sage wet earth and approaching rain. Talon was your brother? She asked gently. My younger brother. Killed at San Pedro along with 2 other Apache and 3 white homesteaders. All shot down while watering stock at a spring used by both peoples for generations. Chogan's voice remained steady, but Rose heard the carefully controlled anguish underneath. Rose felt a chill unrelated to her wet clothes. The ledger entries I found payments to someone called Hawkeye, dated right before the San Pedro incident. If I could prove Pike paid for those murders, Chogan shouldered his rifle and studied the darkening sky where storm clouds were building. Storm coming. You need shelter, and Pike's men will be watching every road. There's a territorial judge arriving in Ash River in 2 days, Rose said urgently. If I can reach him with evidence. Not tonight. Too dangerous. Chogan touched the beadwork at his throat, and Rose glimpsed the exquisite craftsmanship. My sister Ayana's camp is near. You'll be safe there. Rose hesitated, torn between desperation and caution. She'd heard wild stories about Apache camps, but she had few alternatives. Pike-controlled Sheriff Briggs owned half the businesses in Ash River, and had made clear her testimony would never reach any court. All right, she decided. But I meant what I said about the judge. If there's any chance to prove Pike's crimes, I have to take it. They walked upstream in gathering darkness, Rose's sodden skirts making each step a struggle. Behind them, the creek sang its ancient song, carrying away secrets and evidence alike. The Apache camp nestled in a grove of cottonwoods, where a smaller stream joined the main creek. 3 brush shelters surrounded a central fire pit, and Rose could smell roasting rabbit seasoned with wild herbs. A woman emerged from the largest shelter, tall and graceful, with silver threading through her black braids and the same strong features as Chogan. Ayana Chogan spoke briefly in Apache, then switched to English. My sister, this is Rose Callahan. She needs our help. Ayana studied Rose with intelligent brown eyes, taking in her bedraggled condition. She spoke to Chogan in their language, her tone questioning, but not hostile. She asks if you're the white woman who kept Pike's ledgers. Chogan translated. Rose straightened, despite her exhaustion. I was, until I discovered he's been cheating everyone, including your people. The water he's diverting belongs to this entire creek system. Your gardens, your stock ponds, everything downstream. A boy of perhaps 10 summers peered from behind Ayana's skirts, his curious gaze fixed on Rose's flame-colored hair. Ayana smiled and ruffled the child's dark hair. Yazi, my son, she said in careful English. He thinks the spirits put fire in your hair for protection. Rose managed a tired smile. In Ireland, they say red hair brings luck, though I'm beginning to question that wisdom. Ayana led them to the fire, wrapping Rose in a warm blanket and offering her a bowl of stew. The meat was unfamiliar, but well seasoned with herbs that warmed her from within. As Rose ate, Chogan spoke quietly with his sister, occasionally glancing toward the distant lights of Ash River. Pike's men came through yesterday, he finally reported. Searching, offering silver for information about a red-haired woman. They know I copied the ledger pages. Rose set down the empty bowl. But those pages are somewhere in the creek, now probably torn to pieces. Chogan fingered the beadwork at his throat. In the firelight, Rose could see the intricate patterns, more clearly geometric designs, in blue and white, with tiny silver beads that reflected the flames. "The San Pedro you mentioned," he said quietly. "The payment records. What exactly did they say?" Rose closed her eyes, trying to recall the precise entries. Payments to someone called Hawkeye and others, listed as San Pedro clearing operations. The dates would have been spring of 1874. On May 15th, 1874. Chogan's voice was barely above a whisper. The day before Talon died. Young Yazi had crept closer to the fire, fascinated by Rose's pale skin and vivid green eyes. When she smiled at him, he ducked his head shyly, but didn't retreat. He asks if all Irish women have eyes the color of spring grass. Ayanna translated after the boy whispered something. Tell him Irish eyes hold the color of home green fields and gentle rain. Rose's voice caught with homesickness, though I haven't seen either in 4 years. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The family quickly banked the fire and gathered belongings. Rose found herself helping naturally, working alongside people who had every reason to distrust her, but had offered shelter without question. As they took refuge in the largest shelter, Rose listened to rain drumming on the brush roof. She thought of her father drowning because greedy men had refused to replace frayed cables, and felt familiar rage burn in her chest. The same pattern of corruption, the same dismissal of warnings, the same casual disregard for lives that didn't matter to those in power. In the morning, Chogan said, settling against the wall with his rifle across his knees, "We go to town. Find Dr. Edwin Morris. He's fair treats Apache and white alike. If anyone will help get testimony to the judge, it's him. Dr. Morris knows about Pike, knows enough to be suspicious. Pike's been pressuring him to stop treating Apache patients, says it hurts his standing with respectable folks." Chogan's eyes reflected the dim glow of banked coals. Dr. Morris told him to go to Blazes. Outside, the storm was building. Wind howled through the cottonwoods, and Rose could hear the creek rising with mountain runoff. Somewhere in that torrent, her precious evidence was being scattered across miles of desert. "I had one chance," she said quietly. "One opportunity to stop Pike, and I lost it in the water. Evidence can surface again," Ayanna said softly. "Truth has a way of floating back to where it's needed." Rose wanted to believe that, but experience had taught her otherwise. In New York, dock owners had covered up her father's death with bribes and threats. Here in Arizona territory, Pike owned the sheriff and controlled the territorial delegate. Men like Victor Pike didn't fall because of lost ledger pages and Irish bookkeepers' testimony. Still, as she listened to the storm rage outside and felt the shelter's warmth around her, Rose found herself thinking of the moment when Chogan had emerged from the shadows. He'd risked his life for a complete stranger, asked nothing in return, and now offered help in her fight against the man who had murdered his brother. She'd come west seeking a new life, fleeing the corruption that had killed her father. Instead, she'd found herself allied with an Apache warrior who wore his grief like armor and spoke of justice with the voice of someone who'd learned not to expect it. Dawn came gray and wet heavy clouds, still building over the mountains. Rose woke to find Ayanna already up tending a small fire and preparing breakfast of corn cakes and dried fruit. Yaji was outside, apparently conversing with their horses in a mixture of Apache and the universal language of children who love animals. A boy's got a gift with horses, Chogan explained, emerging from checking their mounts. Better than most grown men. Reads their spirits. Rose accepted a warm corn cake gratefully. Her clothes had dried overnight, though they bore permanent stains from creek water and mud. Her copper hair hung loose around her shoulders, having lost its pins to the rushing water. "We should start for town soon," she said, "before Pike's men think to watch Dr. Morris." Chogan nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Creek's running high from the storm. Your papers might have caught on debris downstream instead of washing away completely." Hope flickered in Rose's chest. "You think they might have survived?" "Worth checking. There's a bend below here where flood debris collects against a stone dam." He shouldered his rifle and gathered his gear. "But we go careful. Pike's men might have the same thought." They left Ayana and Yaji at camp with promises to return by evening. The morning air was cool and clean-scented with wet sage and fresh earth. Their horses picked their way carefully along the muddy creek bank, avoiding the worst of the boggy ground. Chogan rode a paint gelding with intelligent eyes and steady nerves. He'd offered Rose the gentler bay mare, but she'd proven surprisingly comfortable in the saddle, not side saddle like a proper lady, but astride like a frontier woman who valued survival over propriety. "You ride well for a bookkeeper," he observed. "My father worked the New York docks, but before the famine he was a horseman in County Cork. Taught me when I was small." Rose's voice softened with memory. "Said a woman who could handle a spirited horse could handle anything else life threw at her. He also taught me to shoot, said the docks were no place for someone who couldn't defend themselves. Wise man. Wise enough to see danger coming. Not wise enough to make the right people listen." The familiar pain crept into Rose's voice. The cable rigging was fraying for weeks before it snapped. He reported it daily, filed formal papers, even offered to pay for repairs himself. But the dock supervisors said Irish complaints weren't worth the cost of new rope. Chogan said nothing, but Rose saw understanding in his dark eyes. He knew what it meant to be dismissed, ignored, blamed for troubles you'd tried to prevent. They reached the bend, where flood debris had collected against a natural stone barrier. Branches, grass bits of cloth, and other flotsam created a tangled dam. Chogan dismounted and began working through the mess methodically, while Rose searched the shallower water near the bank. "Here," she called softly, reaching for a familiar corner of brown leather. Part of the satchel. The leather was waterlogged and torn, but still recognizable. More importantly, wedged beneath it was a folded sheet of paper protected from the worst damage by the satchel's bulk. Rose carefully extracted the document and spread it on a flat rock. The ink had run in places, but the text remained legible, one of Pike's private ledger pages, showing payments to various men for land clearing and security services. "San Pedro clearing," she read aloud, pointing to an entry dated 8 years earlier. "Hawkeye, $50. Flint Face, 25. Others I don't recognize." Chogan's jaw tightened as he studied the names and dates. Day before the ambush. These men were paid the day before my brother died. Rose continued searching and found 2 more pages damaged but readable. One showed falsified water survey reports, while another detailed Pike's actual water usage far exceeding his legal allowances. "It might be enough," she said carefully, folding the documents. "If Dr. Morris can get these to Judge Harrison." A rifle shot cracked across the water, the bullet striking stone inches from Rose's hand. On the far bank, 3 riders had emerged from the trees, led by Flint Face on his distinctive black gelding. "Well, looky here," the scarred foreman called mockingly. "Found our lost sheep and her Apache friend." Chogan was already moving, pulling Rose behind larger rocks as more shots peppered their position. Their horses, well trained for frontier dangers, had scattered to safety among the cottonwoods. "Can you shoot?" Chogan asked, checking his Spencer carbine. Rose nodded, though her experience was limited to hunting with her father's old musket. "Some." Chogan handed her a Colt revolver from his saddlebags. Point and squeeze gentle. Don't jerk the trigger. More shots rang out. But the range was long, and the riders were having difficulty controlling their mounts on muddy ground. Rose tucked the precious documents inside her bodice, then peered over the rocks. "They're looking for a ford," she reported. "But the water's too high and fast." "Good. Gives us time." Chogan sighted carefully and fired once. Across the creek, one rider yelped and grabbed his shoulder, nearly falling from his saddle. Flintface's voice carried clearly. "You're just making this harder on yourselves. Pike wants the woman alive, but he didn't specify what condition. And as for you, Apache, remember what happened to your brother?" The taunt hit its mark. Chogan's face went hard as granite. "Tell Pike that Chogan remembers everything. Tell him Talon's brother is coming." Rose saw something shift in Flintface's scarred features at those words. The foreman spoke quickly to his companions, and they began moving downstream, searching for a crossing. "We need to go," Chogan said, rising from cover. "They'll find a way across." They gathered their gear and caught their horses, who had remained calm despite the gunfire. As they mounted, Rose could see the riders splashing across a shallow stretch a quarter-mile below. "Dr. Morris," she said urgently, "we still need to reach him. Different route, through the old mining claims above town." Chogan spurred his paint toward the hills. "Harder going, but they won't expect it." They climbed steadily through the morning, following deer trails and abandoned prospector paths. The damaged ledger pages pressed against Rose's ribs with each step, a constant reminder of what they carried and what it might cost. Behind them, dust clouds marked their pursuers' progress. Pike's men were spreading out, trying to cut off approaches to Ash River. But Chogan knew this country, intimately, leading Rose through hidden canyons and rocky defiles where horses couldn't follow. By midday, they'd reached a rim overlooking the town. Ash River spread below a collection of wooden buildings clustered around Pike's massive stamp mill. The mill's steam engines coughed black smoke into the clear air, and Rose could see the network of flumes and diversions that carried creek water to Pike's operations. There, Chogan pointed to a neat white house with a medical shingle beside the door. "Dr. Morris." But even as he spoke, they saw riders surrounding the building. Sheriff Walter Briggs stood on the front porch, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun, while deputies searched the premises. "Too late," Rose said bitterly. "Pike got there first." "Maybe. Sheriff might just be asking questions. Dr. Morris has too much respect in town for Pike to move against him openly." They waited and watched. After an hour, Briggs and his men mounted up and rode toward the mill. Dr. Morris emerged from his house, shaking his head in disgust, and began tending his garden. "Now," Chogan said, while they're distracted. They descended through an arroyo that opened behind the doctor's property. Morris looked up from his tomato plants as they approached a thin, gray-haired man with kind eyes and gentle hands, marked by years of frontier medicine. "Chogan," he said with genuine warmth. "Good to see you, though. I suspect this isn't a social call." His gaze shifted to Rose. "And you must be Miss Callahan. Sheriff Briggs was just here asking about you." Rose noticed something that made her pause. Sitting on Dr. Morris's examination table was an expensive leather medical bag, far too fine for a frontier doctor's typical equipment. The brass clasps were engraved with initials that weren't Morris's, and the leather showed no signs of the wear she'd expect from daily use in the Arizona desert. "What did you tell him?" Rose asked, filing the observation away. "That I hadn't seen you, which was true at the time." Dr. Morris set down his gardening tools, but Rose caught him glancing at the documents she carried with an intensity that seemed more calculating than concerned. "But I also mentioned that if I had seen you, I'd have urged you to speak with the territorial judge when he arrives. Some things matter more than local politics." Rose pulled the damaged documents from her bodice. "I have proof. Pike's been stealing water rights and paying for murders. but I need help getting this evidence to Judge Harrison. Dr. Morris examined the papers, his expression growing grim. But Rose noticed his fingers lingered on the financial details longer than necessary, and his questions focused more on Pike's business operations than the murders. "These entries correspond to incidents I remember," he said finally. "The trouble at San Pedro, the conflict over the Miller homestead." He looked at Chogan. "Your brother was at San Pedro. Talon died there along with others who just wanted water for their stock. And Pike paid for those deaths." Dr. Morris folded the documents carefully, but Rose saw him quickly memorize several account numbers. "This needs to reach Judge Harrison immediately. But Briggs is watching my office, and Pike's men are all over town." "Then we wait," Rose said. "Find somewhere safe until the judge arrives." "No." Chogan's voice was flat. "Pike won't wait. He'll move against anyone who might help us." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them. Dr. Morris quickly led them inside, where they could observe through his front window. Sheriff Briggs had returned this time, accompanied by Flint Face and 2 other gunmen. They dismounted and approached the door. "Dr. Morris," Briggs called. "Need another word with you." Morris motioned for Rose and Chogan to hide in his back room, then opened the front door. "Sheriff, what can I do for you? Pike's missing some important papers, stolen from his office by that Irish woman." Briggs stepped inside without invitation. "You certain you haven't seen her?" "I told you before. I know what you told me. But Pike's authorized a substantial reward for information. Enough to fund that new clinic wing you're always talking about." Rose pressed her ear to the wall listening. Dr. Morris's voice remained steady, but she could hear underlying tension. "Sheriff, I took an oath to do no harm. That extends beyond my medical practice. And I took an oath to uphold the law. Pike's property was stolen, making Miss Callahan a thief. What property exactly? Pike claims ownership of many things that don't rightfully belong to him." Silence, then the sound of boots moving through the house. Rose heard Briggs searching methodically. "Doc," came Flint Face's gravelly voice. "Pike don't appreciate folks making things complicated. You follow my meaning. I understand that Victor Pike believes he owns this town, but territorial law says otherwise. Territorial law is 2 days away. Pike's justice is right here, right now." Rose touched the Colt at her belt, but Chogan shook his head. A gunfight in the doctor's house would only get innocent people killed. After what felt like hours, the searchers finally departed. Dr. Morris waited several minutes before opening the back room door, his face pale and drawn. "They're gone, but they'll return. And they'll be watching the house." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "I'm sorry, but I can't hide you here. Too dangerous." But as he spoke, Rose noticed his eyes dart to a small wooden box on his desk, a box that hadn't been there when they'd arrived, and which he seemed anxious to keep their attention away from. "We understand," Rose said. "But the documents, I'll get them to Judge Harrison. There's a way, but it means you two need to disappear for a day or so." "Can you manage that?" Chogan nodded. "We can. But what about your safety? I've been dealing with Pike longer than most. He needs me too much to risk killing me. Too many influential families depend on my services." Dr. Morris smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, I have friends in territorial government. Pike knows that." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Morris provided supplies and ammunition. "There's an old prospector's cabin up in Cedar Canyon," he told them. "Abandoned since the silver played out. Should be safe." But as they prepared to mount their horses, Dr. Morris caught Rose's arm. "Miss Callahan, you should know Pike's been spreading stories about you, claiming you've been embezzling from him for months, making wild accusations to cover your crimes." Rose felt a chill. "Will people believe him?" "Some will. Pike has influence, and you're an outsider." Dr. Morris's grip on her arm tightened slightly. "But Judge Harrison isn't local. He'll examine evidence, not gossip. They left town by a circuitous route, climbing into the foothills as the sun set. The prospector's cabin proved to be a sturdy log structure tucked into a grove of cedar trees, with a commanding view of the approaches. Inside, they found basic supplies, canned goods blankets, a small wood stove. Chogan checked the perimeter, while Rose got a fire started and prepared a simple meal. "Secure enough," he reported, settling beside the stove. No sign of immediate pursuit. They ate in comfortable silence, both exhausted from the day's tensions. Outside, night sounds filled the canyon owls, calling small creatures rustling in the brush. "A gun," Rose said finally. "Something about Dr. Morris troubles me." "What do you mean?" Rose described the expensive medical bag, the way Morris had studied the financial details, the mysterious wooden box. "I might be wrong, but you think he can't be trusted?" "I think he's a good man caught between impossible choices. But good men sometimes make compromises they later regret." Chogan was quiet for a long moment. "Apache way is to plan for what you can control, accept what you cannot. And trust is earned through actions, not words." They banked the fire and settled down to sleep. Rose wrapped in blankets near the warm stove, Chogan positioned where he could watch doors and windows. Despite her exhaustion, Rose found sleep elusive. Tomorrow would bring Judge Harrison to Ash River, and with him their final chance to see justice done. But as she drifted toward unconsciousness, Rose realized something fundamental had changed in her thinking. She was no longer merely seeking justice for her father's death or even Pike's crimes. She was fighting for the possibility of a life where people like Chogan and Ayanna could stand together against men like Pike and his hired killers. Morning brought devastating news. Chogan returned from scouting to find Rose preparing breakfast over the small stove. Riders moving toward the Apache camp. He reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. At least 6 men heavily armed. Rose's blood chilled. Ayanna and Yaji. Could be coincidence. More likely Pike sending a message. Chogan was already gathering his gear. Either way, we need to know. They abandoned the cabin's safety and rode hard toward the creek. As they neared the cottonwood grove, smoke became visible above the trees, far too much for a normal cooking fire. They approached cautiously, but found the camp deserted. The brush shelters had been systematically destroyed, belongings scattered and trampled. Most heartbreaking of all, Yazi's favorite possession, a wooden horse Chogan had carved for his 7th birthday, lay broken beside the cold fire pit. "Tracks," Chogan said, studying the churned earth with practiced skill. 7 horses, maybe 8, heading directly toward town. Rose picked up the shattered toy, her heart breaking. "Pike has them, maybe. Or maybe Ayanna saw them coming and escaped with Yaji." But Chogan's voice lacked conviction. His sister was resourceful, but she would never have abandoned the boy's treasured horse. They followed the clear trail toward Ash River, hope fading with each mile as the tracks led directly to Pike's mill complex, where they disappeared among dozens of other hoofprints. "We need help," Rose said desperately. "Dr. Morris, Sheriff Briggs, someone with authority." "Briggs works for Pike, and we can't be certain about Dr. Morris." Chogan's knuckles were white around his reins. "This is about drawing us out. Pike knows we'll come for them. Then we don't disappoint him." Chogan looked at her sharply. "You're not Apache, Rose. This isn't your fight more than it has to be. It became my fight when Pike sent men to kill me. It became my fight when I found those ledger pages proving he murdered your brother." Rose met his eyes with unwavering resolve. "And it became my fight when I watched you risk everything to save a complete stranger." They spent the remainder of the day watching the mill from concealment mapping guard positions and searching for any sign of Ayanna and Yaji. The mill complex was larger and more fortified, Then Rose had realized multiple buildings clustered around the main stamp mill with Pike's office and residence, in a two-story frame structure overlooking the entire operation. As evening approached, they observed Flintface emerge from the office building and speak briefly with several guards. Whatever he told them caused increased activity throughout the complex. "Judge must be arriving tomorrow," Chogan observed. "Pike's getting nervous. Or he's preparing to move Ayana and Yaji somewhere more permanent." Rose studied the fortress-like arrangement. "We can't wait much longer." "No, we cannot." That night, they met secretly with Dr. Morris behind his clinic. The doctor's news was both encouraging and terrifying. "Judge Harrison arrived this afternoon ahead of schedule. I've spoken with him privately and shown him copies of the documents. He's agreed to convene an emergency hearing tomorrow morning." Rose noticed that Dr. Morris seemed unusually nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. There was something forced about his manner, as if he were reciting rehearsed lines. "What about Ayana and Yaji?" Rose asked urgently. Dr. Morris's expression darkened. "Pike's holding them at the abandoned Quicksilver mine about 5 miles upstream. Claims they were trespassing on his mineral claims, stealing water. That's ancestral camping ground," Chogan said angrily. "My people have used that water for centuries." "I know. But Pike has papers claiming he purchased the mineral rights, and territorial law gives mineral claims precedence." Dr. Morris spread a hand-drawn map on his examination table. "The mine's been abandoned for 2 years since the mercury played out, but the main buildings are still sound." Rose studied the crude map. "How many guards?" "At least 4 or 5 watching the entrance. But there's something else. Pike's planning to move them tonight." Flintface was seen loading supplies and rope into a wagon. "Rope," Chogan repeated quietly. "Pike's message is clear. Testify against him tomorrow and your family dies. He's betting you'll choose their lives over justice." Rose felt anger burning in her chest. "He's wrong. We save them and see him hang." Easier said than done. The mine sits in a box canyon only one way in or out, and Pike's men will be expecting trouble. Chogan traced routes on the map. "What about the old ventilation shaft? Partially flooded, definitely dangerous. But..." Dr. Morris considered carefully. "The main ventilation shaft emerges on the ridge above. It's narrow, hazardous, but it would put you inside their perimeter." Rose looked between the two men. "Doctor, you can't possibly..." "I'm not going near that mine. I'm needed here to testify before Judge Harrison." Dr. Morris met her eyes, but Rose caught something evasive in his expression. "But I can provide medical supplies, ammunition, anything else you need." They planned through the night. The strategy was simple but dangerous. Rose and Chogan would approach from above, using the ventilation shaft to reach the underground workings. They would locate and free Ayana and Yaji, then escape through the tunnel system. "What about Pike?" Rose asked as they prepared to leave. "First we save the innocent," Chogan replied. "Then we deal with the guilty." Dr. Morris pressed a leather medical bag into Rose's hands. "Bandages, laudanum instruments. If anyone gets hurt, they won't," Rose said with more confidence than she felt. "God willing," Dr. Morris said softly, but there was something odd in his tone, a hesitation that made Rose wonder what he wasn't telling them. They departed town before dawn, riding through increasingly desolate country. The Quicksilver mine had been carved into a hillside during the territorial mining boom, when men believed mercury would make them wealthy. Instead, most had gone insane from toxic fumes or died in cave-ins, and the mine had been abandoned when more profitable claims were discovered. The main workings occupied a narrow canyon with various buildings scattered around the mine entrance. From their position on the ridge above, Rose could see guards posted at the canyon mouth and smoke rising from what appeared to be a temporary camp. "There..." Chogan pointed to a rusted iron grate set into the rocky cliff face. "Main ventilation shaft." The grate had been secured with chain and padlock, but years of weather had weakened the metal. Chogan used his rifle butt to break the chain, wincing at the noise. "Hope they didn't hear that," Rose whispered. The shaft was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for their shoulders. They descended slowly, feeling their way down rusted iron rungs set into the rock. The air reeked of stagnant water and something else, a sharp, metallic tang that made Rose's stomach churn. "Mercury," Chogan explained quietly. "Still leaching from the rock. Don't touch anything you don't have to." They emerged into the main tunnel system, a maze of passages carved through stone. Emergency lanterns left by the mining company provided dim light, though many had burned out. Following the primary drift, they worked their way towards sounds of activity. Voices, the creak of timber, the scrape of boots on stone. Finally, they reached a chamber, where yellow lamplight spilled from an opening ahead. Peering around the corner, Rose saw them. Ayana sat with dignity against the wall of a natural cave, her hands bound with rope, but her bearing still proud. Yaji huddled beside her, his young face tight with fear, but showing no tears. Two guards sat playing cards near the entrance, their rifles propped against the stone wall. "Only two," Chogan breathed. "We can handle them." But before they could move, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind, more guards returning, or perhaps someone coming to check on the prisoners. Rose made a split-second decision. She stepped boldly into the chamber with her hands raised, the Colt tucked inside her jacket. "Don't shoot," she called to the startled guards. "I'm Rose Callahan. I believe Victor Pike wants to see me alive." The guards were on their feet instantly, weapons trained on her. "Where's your Apache friend?" one demanded. "Dead." Rose lied smoothly, praying Chogan understood her plan. "Shot trying to cross the canyon. I came to negotiate with Pike." Behind her in the darkness, she hoped Chogan was moving into position. "Well," the second guard laughed. "Lady, you ain't in a position to negotiate. Pike thinks otherwise. He's been chasing me across Arizona for some ledger pages. Well, I have them, and I'm ready to trade." Rose pulled the documents from her jacket, holding them where both guards could see. Pike's secrets in exchange for the woman and boy. Fair trade. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "Flintface said to hold everyone until morning. Flintface isn't facing a hangman's rope." Rose stepped closer, gambling everything on creating confusion. "Those pages prove Pike paid for murders, including the ambush at San Pedro 8 years ago." At the mention of San Pedro, both guards tensed visibly. Rose realized with growing horror that they might have been there, might have pulled triggers that killed Talon and others. "You weren't supposed to know about San Pedro," the first guard said slowly. "I know about all of it. The false surveys, the stolen water rights, the payments to Hawkeye and his crew." Rose let authority creep into her voice. "Question is, do you want to hang alongside Pike when the judge hears this evidence?" The second guard was wavering, but his partner remained suspicious. "You're bluffing. If you had real proof, you'd have taken it to the law." "I tried. Pike owns Sheriff Briggs, but he doesn't own the territorial judge who arrived yesterday." That got their attention. Both men looked genuinely worried. Judge Harrison's already seen copies of these documents. Rose continued stretching the truth. "The only question is whether Pike faces charges alone or drags his hired guns down with him." "She's lying," the first guard insisted, but doubt colored his voice. Rose was about to respond when Chogan materialized from the shadows like a vengeful spirit. His rifle butt caught the first man behind the ear, dropping him instantly. The second guard spun toward the threat, but Rose was already moving. She tackled him around the waist, sending both crashing into the card table. Playing cards scattered as they rolled across the stone floor, the guard struggling to bring his rifle up, while Rose clawed for his eyes. Chogan ended the struggle with a precise blow to the man's temple. Both guards lay unconscious, their weapons kicked away. "Clever," Chogan said, cutting Ayana's bonds with his knife. "Dangerous, but clever. Are you hurt?" Rose asked Ayanna, who was rubbing circulation back into her wrists. We are unharmed, but they spoke of moving us before dawn to the old dam site. Ayanna gathered Yaji against her side. Pike planned something that requires witnesses to die. The hearing, Rose realized. If we disappear, there's no one to testify against him. Then we make sure we're very much alive come morning. Chogan shouldered his rifle and checked the tunnel entrance. How many more guards? 3 at the canyon mouth. Flintface was here earlier, but left. Ayanna studied the unconscious men. These 2 were to prepare us for transport when he returned. When? Soon, before the moon sets. Rose looked toward the tunnel entrance where dawn light was becoming visible. We need to get out of here now. They gathered their gear and prepared to leave. But Yaji tugged at Chogan's sleeve and pointed deeper into the mine workings, speaking rapidly in Apache. Then he says there are more prisoners. Ayanna translated. White men in the lower tunnel. Chogan and Rose exchanged glances. More complications, more people to rescue. But they couldn't abandon other prisoners. Show us, Chogan told his nephew. Yaji led them through a maze of side tunnels to another chamber where 3 men sat chained to iron posts. Rose recognized one immediately. Quiet Will, the old prospector, who'd helped them escape Pike's riders. Miss Rose. Will's weathered face lit up. Thought we was goners for sure. What are you doing here, Will? Pike's men grabbed me yesterday, said I was harboring fugitives. These other fellows were asking too many questions about water rights. The other prisoners proved to be Tom Bradley, a surveyor, and James Mitchell, a newspaper correspondent. Both had been investigating Pike's operations when they'd been arrested on fabricated charges. We can testify, Bradley said as Chogan broke their chains with a mining pick. We've seen the false surveys, the intimidation. Save the testimony for the judge, Rose replied. Right now, we need to get everyone out alive. Their escape route through the ventilation shaft was no longer viable. Too many people, including Quiet Will with his smoke-damaged lungs. Instead, they would have to fight their way out through the canyon. 9 of us, 4 of them, Chogan calculated. But they have position and better weapons. They also think we're helpless prisoners, Rose pointed out. That gives us one advantage. They moved through the mine workings toward the main entrance, Yaji, scouting ahead with natural silence. At the mouth of the tunnel, they could see the guards' positions, 1 in the foreman's shack, 2 more by the corral. Wait for my signal, Chogan whispered. Then move fast for the horses. But before he could give the signal, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the canyon entrance. A familiar voice carried clearly in the still air. Flintface, time to move the prisoners. Victor Pike himself rode into the canyon, flanked by Hawkeye and 2 other gunmen. Rose got her first clear look at the man she'd been fighting, tall and well-dressed with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Handsome in a calculated way, but with the kind of handsomeness that concealed rather than revealed character. He's early, Ayanna whispered. Good, Chogan replied grimly. Time to end this. But as Pike dismounted and strode toward the mine entrance, Rose realized their situation had become exponentially more dangerous. They were trapped underground with no easy escape route, facing experienced killers who knew the terrain. The final confrontation was about to begin, and there would be no more running, no more hiding. Either they would emerge from this mine as free people, or they would never emerge at all. Pike's voice carried into the tunnel as he spoke with Flintface near the entrance. Load them in the wagon. We'll take them to the dam site and finish this properly. What about the Apache and the woman? Flintface asked. Dr. Morris is getting too close to the truth, and that judge isn't as cooperative as Briggs. Pike's tone was casual, as if discussing the weather. Time to tie up loose ends. Make it look like they tried to escape during transport. Regrettable accident. Rose felt cold fury wash over her. This man had killed her father as surely as if he'd cut the dock cables himself, murdered Chogan's brother, and now planned to dispose of witnesses like unwanted livestock. Not today, she whispered. Chogan nodded grimly. Not today. Rose stepped into the morning light with her hands raised. The documents were tucked inside her jacket, but she made no move to reach for them. "Mr. Pike," she said with forced calm, "I understand you want to discuss terms." Pike studied her with cold blue eyes, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Miss Callahan, you've caused me considerable trouble. Trouble seems to follow me wherever I go." "Indeed, but it ends here." Pike gestured to Flintface, who moved to search her. "The documents, if you please." Rose pulled out the ledger pages and held them just out of reach. "First, let the others go. They haven't seen these papers. I'm afraid that's impossible. Too many loose ends, too many people asking the wrong questions." Pike stepped closer. "You see, Miss Callahan, you've fundamentally misunderstood our relationship. I don't negotiate with thieves." "Then we have a problem," Rose said quietly. Pike raised an eyebrow. "Do we—" Rose dropped the documents and dove sideways as Chogan exploded from the mine entrance with his rifle already firing. The first shot took one of Pike's gunman's center mass, spinning him to the ground. The second shot shattered Flintface's weapon as he tried to bring it up. The canyon erupted in gunfire and chaos. Quiet Will and the other prisoners emerged from the mine, Will carrying a mining pick. Tom Bradley had found an old shotgun in the foreman's shack, while James Mitchell armed himself with rocks and righteous fury. "Well, ain't this a fine mess?" Will muttered, ducking as a bullet whined overhead. "Should have stuck to prospecting for silver instead of rescuing damsels in distress." Ayana appeared with Yaji, both moving toward the horses. She'd acquired one of the guards' rifles and proved she remembered her warrior ancestors' lessons. Pike dove for cover behind an ore cart, his composure finally cracking. "Kill them all," he screamed. "Every last one." But his men were discovering that cornered people fight differently than helpless prisoners. Hawkeye found himself facing Chogan in single combat among the mine tailings. And despite his reputation, he was no match for an Apache warrior protecting his family. The fight was brutal but decisive. Chogan moved with fluid grace, while Hawkeye relied on size and brute strength. When Hawkeye drew his knife, Chogan was already inside his guard, his own blade, finding the spot between ribs with surgical precision. Rose retrieved her Colt and found herself trading shots with Flintface across the canyon. Her father's training proved valuable. She might not be the fastest, but she was accurate when it counted. A bullet whined past her ear close enough to burn, and she dropped behind a boulder as another shot chipped stone. "Think, Rose," she told herself, her father's voice echoing in memory. "Use your head, not your fear." She peered around the boulder and saw Flintface reloading behind timber. Rising quickly, she fired twice. The first shot missed, but the second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The turning point came when Yazi, following some desperate plan, pushed a boulder loose from the canyon rim. It crashed down with earth-shaking force, missing Pike by inches, but cutting off his escape route and spoiling the aim of his remaining men. But Pike wasn't finished. As the battle raged around him, he pulled out a stick of dynamite, old mining explosive he'd found in the abandoned workings. "Everybody stop," he screamed, holding a lit match near the fuse. "Stop or I blow us all to hell." The gunfire ceased abruptly. Pike stood in the center of the canyon dynamite, in one hand match, in the other, his expensive clothes torn and his silver hair wild. "That's better," he panted. "Now, Miss Callahan, you're going to walk over here nice and slow, and we're going to have that conversation about your future, what little remains of it." Rose started forward, but her mind was racing. She remembered something from her father's stories about the New York docks, how dynamite needed a strong shock to explode, how unstable it became with age and moisture. "You know, Pike," she said conversationally, still walking toward him, "my father worked with explosives on the docks. He always said the dangerous thing about old dynamite wasn't the explosion, it was how unpredictable it got when the nitroglycerin started sweating out." Pike glanced down at the stick in his hand, and Rose saw his confidence waver slightly. The dynamite did indeed look old, with dark stains along its surface. Nice try, Irish, but I'm not falling for. Rose dove to the side, just as Chogan, understanding her plan, put a rifle bullet through the center of the ore cart Pike was standing behind. The cart's metal rang like a bell, the sound echoing off the canyon walls with tremendous force. Pike, startled by the noise and already nervous about the unstable explosive, fumbled the dynamite. It fell from his hands, rolling across the rocky ground toward the canyon wall. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then, with a sound like the world ending, the dynamite exploded against the stone wall. The blast was tremendous, echoing off the canyon walls and bringing down a shower of rocks and debris. When the dust settled, Pike lay unconscious, his clothes torn and bloodied, but still breathing. Quiet Will approached the fallen man, cautiously, mining pick in hand. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," he said with satisfaction. "Fancy man's still alive, though he's going to have a powerful headache when he wakes up." The aftermath was swift. Pike's surviving men, seeing their leader defeated and facing the combined fury of 9 determined people, surrendered without further fight. They bound the prisoners with rope from the mine and prepared for the trek back to town. But as they were loading Pike into a wagon for transport, the sound of approaching hoofbeats filled the canyon. Rose's heart sank, thinking more of Pike's men were arriving. Instead, she saw Dr. Morris riding into the canyon, but he wasn't alone. Sheriff Briggs accompanied him along with several deputies. But something was wrong, and their weapons were trained on the doctor, not on Pike's group. Very impressive, Dr. Morris said, his cultured voice carrying a note Rose had never heard before. "Though I must say you've made this considerably more complicated than necessary." Rose felt her world tilt as the horrible truth crashed over her. "Dr. Morris, what are you doing here?" "Fulfilling a bargain made long ago, I'm afraid." The doctor's kind eyes now seemed calculating. "You see, Miss Callahan Pike isn't the only man in this territory with debts to pay and secrets to protect." Chogan's rifle swung toward this new threat, but Sheriff Briggs was faster. "I wouldn't, Apache. We've got you surrounded." "You see," Dr. Morris continued conversationally, "Pike has been my silent partner for years, not by choice initially. He discovered a mistake I made early in my career. A patient died due to my inexperience with frontier medicine, and Pike helped cover it up. Since then, he's owned me." Rose's mind reeled. "The territorial judge will receive a report stating that you and your allies were killed while resisting arrest for theft and murder." Dr. Morris smiled coldly. "Tragic, but hardly surprising." "But the documents," Rose protested desperately. Judge Harrison has copies of different documents, entirely carefully prepared forgeries that actually implicate you rather than Pike." Dr. Morris pulled a leather portfolio from his coat. "The real evidence will be destroyed in the unfortunate accident that's about to occur." Pike was climbing to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth with obvious satisfaction despite his injuries. "You played your parts perfectly. Better than I could have hoped." But even as despair threatened to overwhelm Rose completely, she noticed something that gave her hope. Young Yaji had vanished during the confusion of Dr. Morris's arrival, and she could hear the distant sound of more approaching horses. "There's just one problem with your plan," Rose said, stalling for time. "And what might that be?" Dr. Morris asked indulgently. "Judge Harrison isn't just any territorial appointee. He's a federal judge sent specifically to investigate water rights corruption." Rose was improvising desperately. "He has authority that supersedes your local arrangements. Federal or territorial judges can be reasoned with." Pike said dismissively. "Not Judge Harrison," came a new voice from above them. Everyone looked up to see a distinguished man in a black suit standing on the canyon rim, flanked by 6 federal marshals with rifles trained on the group below. Judge Harrison himself had arrived, along with serious federal firepower. More importantly, young Yaji stood beside the judge, his small hand holding papers that looked very familiar to Rose. Dr. Morris. The judge called down his voice, carrying absolute authority. I believe you have some explaining to do. This boy brought me some very interesting documents, copies that someone was wise enough to make before trusting you with the originals. The doctor's face had gone white. Your Honor, I can explain. I'm certain you can. And you'll have ample opportunity to do so at your federal trial. Judge Harrison gestured to his marshals. Arrest them all, Pike, Morris, Briggs, and any surviving Confederates. Charges include murder, conspiracy, theft of federal resources, and treason. As federal marshals descended into the canyon, Rose finally understood what had happened. Yaji had indeed taken extra copies, ones that Ayanna had made without telling anyone, and had somehow found his way to Judge Harrison during the night, guiding the federal officials to the mine. How did you know to come here? She asked the judge as marshals shackled Pike and Dr. Morris. The boy found me before dawn, brought documents that corroborated everything we suspected about Pike's operation. Judge Harrison smiled down at Yaji with respect. He may not speak much English, but he understands justice. Ayanna gathered her son against her side, speaking to him rapidly in Apache with obvious pride. When she looked up at Rose, there were tears in her eyes. He says he remembered the stories about his grandfather, that sometimes the smallest warrior must carry the most important message. Rose knelt beside the boy, studying his serious young face. You saved us all, Yaji. The boy smiled shyly and spoke in halting English. Family helps family. Pike, now shackled, made one final attempt at negotiation. Your Honor, I'm prepared to make substantial contributions to territorial development. Mr. Pike. Judge Harrison interrupted coldly. You're going to federal prison for a very long time. Your only choice is whether you cooperate with investigators or face additional charges. Dr. Morris, also in shackles and looking older than Rose had ever seen him, tried to catch her eye. Miss Callahan, I want you to know I never intended for innocent people to die. Pike forced my cooperation through blackmail, threatened to expose my past mistakes and destroy my career. Maybe that's true. Rose replied quietly, feeling only sadness for the man who had helped them before betraying them. But you still chose to betray people who trusted you with their lives. The aftermath moved with federal efficiency. Marshals took custody of all prisoners and began seizing Pike's assets. Sheriff Briggs, facing federal charges himself, provided detailed testimony about Pike's corruption network in exchange for a reduced sentence. Quiet will. Tom Bradley and James Mitchell were treated for injuries and released to provide testimony. All three would play crucial roles in the federal trials that followed. As the sun climbed higher over Quicksilver Canyon, Rose found herself sitting on a boulder beside Chogan, watching federal agents catalog evidence and tend to the wounded. What happens now? She asked, suddenly feeling exhausted as adrenaline faded. A Justice Chogan said, simply touching the beadwork at his throat. Finally, after all these years. And after justice, Chogan was quiet for a moment. After justice comes the harder work. Building something new from what remains. Rose understood. The corruption had been exposed, the criminals arrested, but the real work of creating fair water distribution, honest government, and lasting peace was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Rose stood beside Willow Creek, where she'd first met Chogan. The water ran clear and unobstructed, free from Pike's illegal diversions. Word had come that morning Pike had been sentenced to life in federal prison. Dr. Morris to 10 years for his cooperation in covering up murders, and Sheriff Briggs to 5 years for corruption. The Territorial Water Commission had moved quickly to establish fair allocation systems throughout the region, and communities that had been at each other's throats were learning to share resources. Rose had been offered a position with the commission, using her accounting skills to ensure fair distribution and prevent future corruption. The work would be challenging, but satisfying, helping to heal wounds that Pike had inflicted on entire communities. Chogan found her there as the sun set behind the mountains, turning the creek water to liquid gold. "Good day in town?" he asked, settling beside her on the familiar bank. "Judge Harrison says the federal investigation will continue for months. They're finding corruption in 3 territories." Rose pulled off her boots and dangled her feet in the cool water. "But it feels good to know we started something that will help a lot of people." "Your father would be proud." Rose smiled, thinking of Patrick Callahan and his lessons about speaking truth to power. "I think he would." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow toward distant settlements. In the weeks since Pike's arrest, they'd grown easy in each other's company, not passionate romance, but something deeper. Mutual respect earned through shared danger trust, built through tested loyalty. As Chogan said finally, "I need to tell you something." She turned to study his profile in the fading light, noting the strength in his weathered features and the gentleness in his dark eyes. "What is it?" Chogan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers working the beadwork at his throat. Finally, with great ceremony, he untied it and held it out to her. Talon made this for the woman he planned to marry. He said it would protect her spirit, keep her connected to family, even when the world tried to pull her away. Rose accepted the intricate beadwork with trembling hands, feeling its weight and the love that had gone into every stitch. The geometric patterns seemed to glow in the starlight. "Chogan, I can't take something so precious. She died of fever the winter before San Pedro. Talon carried this until he died, and I've carried it since." Chogan's voice was gentle but certain. Time to let it serve its purpose. Rose felt tears prick her eyes as she understood what he was offering. Not just marriage, but inclusion in something larger. A family, a tradition, a future built on foundations stronger than convenience. "You're sure?" she whispered. "I told Flint Face that day that I never had a wife. That was true. I had a brother to avenge a family, to protect enemies to face." Chogan reached out to touch her cheek. "But those days are finished. Now I want what Talon wanted someone to build tomorrow with." Rose leaned into his touch, feeling the last walls around her heart crumble. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the hills, a night bird called to its mate. The creek sang its eternal song, carrying away the day's troubles and bringing tomorrow's possibilities. Rose had come to Arizona territory seeking escape from corruption and death. Instead, she had found her courage beside a desert creek, where an Apache warrior had taught her that some things were worth any sacrifice. Now she was exactly who she was meant to be, partner in a life built on unshakable foundations of trust, respect, and shared purpose. The water that had once divided communities now flowed free and clear, nourishing all who needed it. And in the end, watching the stars emerge over their valley, while wearing the beadwork that symbolized love, transcending loss, that was justice enough for anyone.